flawed. It has been a difficult few weeks for me. At times I have felt I could barely take the feeling of being in my body. I felt nauseated and so heavy and uncomfortable that I believed I was dying, and in some moments I would have been happy to do so. The emotional pain and grief were too much. If you've read any of my previous essays, this might surprise you. You might think I am a fraud for doing the work that I do. For quite a large chunk of these past few weeks, I would have agreed with you. This is not the first time this has happened. It is a pattern that has cycled around again and again my whole life. But this time was different. I am an emotional being. I feel things deeply. In a world that prefers we do not make a fuss, this is often frowned upon. In my experience, I have seen how it is acceptable to put on a display of emotions, but is quite different to actually feel them. One is socially sanctioned and has parameters. The other is primal and wild, and we know how most people feel about that. If you don't, I mean frightened. And so it has been my whole life. I have been labelled crazy, too much, and unstable. And on the occasions that I would have been in the pits of despair, I would have agreed with those who suggested as much. And then I would emerge, carrying something new insights, vitality, inspiration. Sometimes I would be completely transformed to the point where I and others would barely recognise me. Then it would cycle around again, and I would feel like a total fuck up and wonder what the point is and be ready to give up on life. I resigned myself to the fact that I am deeply flawed. So what is different this time? From the outward appearance, nothing. If you're of the inclination that emotions are too much and should be handled neatly, as many of us are conditioned to believe, I would probably still seem crazy, unstable, and in need of a wee tablet. This time, though, I had people around me that could recognise the gift in my process. They reflected it back to me, and they stayed. This actually made me a little nervous. I am used to man or woman-shaped holes being made in walls as people flee from the storm. But not this time. This is not completely new for me. I do have great friends around the world, and we can talk about anything, go deep, and there is nothing about any of us that is a problem. We accept each other. But there was a particular incident that really shifted my perspective on things during this week. I was due to have a call with a friend in America. We meet each week via Zoom. But on this occasion, I was so miserable and heavy, I felt I was made of lead. In the same way that my enthusiasm can fill a room, so can my misery. And in these times, I usually retreat for the benefit of all concerned. I messaged her to say it was best we left it until another time, explaining some of what I was experiencing, and her reply was, "I have a Scorpio moon. I can handle it. I think we should talk, at least for a while." I had no clue what to do with this, and I observed myself as I felt the urge to push her away because of previous experiences, of which I will give you an illustration in a moment. But I desperately wanted and needed to be held in what I was feeling. So I agreed to go ahead with the call. As I waited to start the Zoom call, I was shaking. I was nervous and anxious and felt conscious that I wasn't smiling, and painfully aware that, in my experience, this is how I must show up in order to be acceptable and not suffer the consequences. We talked about what I was feeling and why, and I verbalised all the horrible things I'd been thinking. She did not flinch. It was not a problem. Then we had a cheeky look at some astrological transits, and slowly I began to feel different. Not necessarily better, but different. My perspective widened, and I had a deeper respect for my way of being. As I reflected on this, I thought back to when my mother died in 2015 and experiences I had. She had been sick for over a year, and as the realisation dawned that she was not going to get better, she and I would talk candidly. "If you are going to die now, Mum," I once said, "how do you want to do it? This is your journey. It's all about you. How can you do it your way? This is something I can do. I can enter the dark places and be present," and she appreciated it. Once she asked me if I thought dying would hurt. I pondered it and said I didn't know, but that if it was like being born, it might, but wondered if it was part of the process, bearable, and perhaps forgotten once the transition was made. At that time, I had a group of friends who were creatives, musicians, artists, all the deep characters. But I was grieving and was not able to be the way I usually was, to carry the performance and keep the group's energy high. I was also in a relationship with a singer-songwriter who was seeing someone else behind my back while my mum was dying. I should have known better, but I wasn't exactly thinking straight at the time. By the time my mum passed, my relationship with these people had deteriorated, and I experienced behaviour from them that shocked and hurt me deeply. They told me I was crazy and needed to see a doctor because I was grieving. My mother's funeral was held at her home, and I stood beside her coffin in the dining room, played guitar and sang "Wade in the Water" at her request. And then my sister and I led the whole house in singing Bob Marley's "Three Little Birds," also at Mum's request. Not the actions of a crazy, unstable woman. I can now see that these people did not have the capacity to be present with someone who actually feels her feelings and feels them fully. Some people just can't do it. And as a culture, we're not taught how to. In fact, the opposite. Stuff it all down or send the feelings into oblivion with happy thoughts or the mantra, "It could be worse." I'm all for gratitude, but there are some situations where suggesting it as a solution is counterproductive and possibly dangerous, in my opinion. And if I have looked to pop psychology, some spiritual circles or cultural frameworks for guidance, I have again found suggestions that there is something amiss with me. And I lack the capacity to let people in and be vulnerable. As the above little snippet demonstrates, it can also be dangerous to be vulnerable and let people in when they are the wrong people. The day after my mum's funeral, I was trying to reach out for support when I was asked by the man with whom I'd been in a relationship with if I was going to kill myself, just because I was grieving. When I said no, he asked me, "What would make you kill yourself, Nina?" in a voice that still sends chills up my spine when I think of it. It turns out my propensity to not let people in at times is not a malfunction, but in fact, discernment. It has become clear that there is a deep, ancient story superimposed upon my capacity to feel and enter the depths of emotional crisis. And I know I'm not the first in my lineage to have been considered crazy for feeling, living, and loving deeply. And because of this narrative, I sometimes cannot figure the fuck out what life needs from me, what it is asking for, or what I am meant to learn. This means at times I throw my hands into the air, collapse in a pool of snot and tears, and give up. It's not pretty, but it turns out it is my process. My point is that I often find what is available as a map or authority on these things defaults to there being something wrong with the one who is not fitting nicely into manageable, theoretical frameworks. Although I did once have a therapist with whom I shared my concern about my melancholy streak, and his response was, "Of course you have a melancholy streak. You have Irish heritage," in a very matter-of-fact manner. When I was thinking about the title for this essay and processing the journey I had recently undertaken without leaving my home, the word flawed came to me. Of course, I rarely take a word at face value and had a look into its etymology. In the early 14th century, it was a noun meaning flake, as in snow, and was also linked to a spark of fire, a splinter, and a fragment. It became used to describe a defect in one's character, and then a material object much later. Now we're talking. This sounds less like there's something wrong that must be corrected, and more like remembering a unique soul blueprint with a dash of Jungian integration and shamanic soul retrieval. My capacity to feel things deeply, particularly in the midst of an emotional crisis, is akin to navigating and returning from the underworld, having wrestled with things that must be wrestled with. For this is where capacity is built and maps are marked out. This is why I can do the work that I do. I know these places intimately. I live this work. Present tense. I am learning this in spirals, and each time another layer or aspect is being revealed. So much of what has been available to me in terms of navigating these dimensions could not comprehend the depth and layers of my experience, and so concluded there was something wrong, or that it or I needed to be managed. But it is not something to be managed. It is a gift to be embraced. I say this now, but please do note that if I'm in the midst of a moment a few months from now and you quote this back to me, expect the air to become blue with expletives as I reject all notion of any truth in it. And please note, this is also part of my process. So who were these people who held me so skillfully during this particular dance around the spiral of feeling I would never figure this shit out and I was just going to lie down and stay there? Ordinary, or rather, extraordinary women. There is so much power and wisdom in what we call ordinary, including people. For some reason, we seem to need things to be big, loud, dramatic. There needs to be a buzz or a buzzword, a method or a modality. These women may well be certified and have qualifications, but in this instance, their true qualification probably consisted of Scorpio, Pisces, 8th or 12th house placements in their natal chart. And of course, my wonderful homeopath. This method of medicine does not frame things as wrong. It sees the bigger picture and views symptoms as part of the process. This has been a powerful reshaping of the personal myth I live within, rewriting my tendency to be overly emotional into a capacity to navigate deep, uncomfortable terrains and return carrying treasure. I have been in this rhythm my whole life, and every time I moved through it, when I returned, I was always changed, but never broken. I offer this one example as an invitation for you to explore a flaw of your own. If you feel you say the wrong thing and piss people off, is it possible your capacity for truth and directness makes people uncomfortable, and maybe sometimes that is necessary? If you're indecisive, is it possible that you have a skill for seeing past polarization and perceiving sacred duality? And if you feel deeply and sometimes descend into the abyss, is it possible that is exactly where you need to go for treasure and transformation. Only you will know your flaws and possible gifts they may hold. What I have discovered this week is that being seen with my flaw hanging out and having people walk towards me and help me gain perspective has changed my relationship with it, shifted my personal myth, and probably done some lineage reweaving at the same time. I wish the same for you and your flaw too.